Hello, everybody. Hi, and welcome. And I'm so amazed you got out in this freezing weather. And thank you for doing that. I'm Judy Maddox. I'm chair of our Western North Carolina Sierra Club, and so delighted to be here. And as you know, we have an incredible topic tonight, the wild and scenic, but the threats and the opportunity to our beloved French Broad River, presented by our wonderful presenter, Jack Eigelman. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Jack in a minute. But I want to tell you first that there are 3 levels of Sierra Club. And when you walked in, there was a cute little piece of paper that allows you to join Sierra Club. And if you follow that, you will be both a national member where they will send you a magazine every month. You will be a chapter member, this is a picture of our chapter, where out of Raleigh, they will send you an email each month called Footnotes. And also the important one is Western North Carolina, which is us. And we will send you an email every second Saturday. And it will tell you about our programs and our alerts. And we would love to have you come and participate in both. And welcome to everybody. So first, I want to acknowledge with great respect the Cherokee, that they have been protecting and loving this land forever. And this is the land that we currently are standing on right this minute. We want to acknowledge that our forests, our environment, for many generations have been protected. We have programs both in person, and of course you are in person every first Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock right here in this room, the Reuter and Ollie Center. But we're also hybrid Zoom link, and that's where I expected you all to be tonight because it's cold outside and you could be next to your fireplace in your living room. But we do have a Zoom link that you will find on our WNC Sierra Club. And we would also like you to sign up on that same site, wncSierraClub.org, to receive our e-newsletters. And you can contact me. The second thing I wanted you to know is that there is a leaders meeting right before this one at 5 o'clock. And you are cordially invited to join. We put our heads together and decide what programs we would like to have month after month and what action alerts we would like to follow. Like the immediate one coming is the election. Do you know that we're having an election this Saturday, next Tuesday? So we are going to have our monthly hike. And Ed, if you'd like to step forward, if you are here. And the one coming up will be Tuesday, November 28th. And here is Ed.
Thanks, Judy. As you can see up here, it mentions the Cradle of Forestry, which is in Pisgah National Forest. And we'll be doing a hike. It's about 5 miles, 600 foot elevation gain, so sort of moderate. And we'll be taking in 4 waterfalls in that length of time. And Bill Snow just told me today he's also helping lead that hike. 2 of those waterfalls were not on any map until just recently. So I'm guessing most of us haven't seen those before. If you want to sign up, you can catch me after the meeting, or it's on Meetup on our page there, and it'll be posted on the website within a day or 2. So you can get more information any of those places. Thanks, Judy.
And now I want to tell you about a very, very exciting program. And Andrew, if you'll come on up, it's called Music, Art, and Policy, or MAP. We are trying to reach out and create the next generation of leadership. As you know, most of our leaders now are in an older generation, and we are looking for a younger generation. So, hey, you guys over there, this is for you, but the rest of us, if you have people at church that you can post, or if you have kids or grandkids or whatever, we want your help, but we also want you to come. So, Andrew, tell us about it.
Thank you, Judy. My name is Andrew Fletcher, and I'm a volunteer with the Sierra Club. And the team that I've been working with of Drew Ball and Caitlin Constantine and myself has put together an event that is geared toward young folks. And by young, I mean 20 to 40. I'm at the upper range of that. My back is here to tell you about that. I'm now 40 years old, but I care deeply about music, art, and politics in my personal life, and this is a very enjoyable way to put this together and try to leverage those interests with the Sierra Club. It is a monthly event. It's been happening on the second Monday of every month at the Wedge at Foundation in the River Arts District. We put together young leaders in 3 different disciplines: music, art, and policy or politics. And this upcoming event is going to be on November 13th at 6 o'clock at the Cloud Room at Wedge at Foundation. And our speakers are going to be Lee Schultes, who is an Asheville area artist. We just booked her today. Our musical musician is going to be Mad Mike Martinez, who, if you listen to BPR, you may have heard his voice there. He has been one of the announcers with BPR for some time, as well as very active in the local music and politics scenes. And we also have in our political speakers will be Caleb Rudow, our representative, our North Carolina state representative. And the format of this is you show up, you get a beer, there's often some pizza, and we're still doing pizza, right? We're still okay. Good. And you get a slice, and you get a chance to hear young folks that are talking about their experience of what it's like to work in music and art and in politics and work with others, and try to show the way that that you can be a part of some of the changes, because the decisions we're making today are going to determine the community that we have in the future, and the folks who are going to be affected by that the most are the youngest folks we have in our world. And so we're trying to marshal those forces together, and it consists of both a bit of live music and interviews with each speaker, as well as a panel discussion where your questions are welcomed and expected to help drive the conversation. So this is it's been a really great fun event. This was our 3rd one coming up on November 13th. And so please come to it. It's free. We ask that you register on Eventbrite. And if you're on Instagram, we are WNC_Sierra_club, and that is one of the best ways to find out about this. And also I noticed that our the QR code we have on here actually goes to our September event, so we're going to update that for the November event. But please reach out and connect about this, because it's a great way to have a beer with some like-minded folks and hear some really interesting information about our local music, art, and policy scenes, which are my favorite worlds of our beautiful Western North Carolina. So we're going to pass out a few of these around the back of the room, and I hope to see each and every one of you there. Thank you.
Right. So as we're coming around, we don't have a huge number, but if you could post these somewhere, and likewise, if you yourself would like one, and please, raise your hand right now, and we'll give you one. Ed's and Andrew will give you these, and take a picture of the QR code. So that would be great. Okay, I also want to tell you we have a program called the Kids Adventure Club for little ones, and we focus on taking inner city kids out to the Arboretum, to the Cradle of Forestry, to pet snakes, to pet turtles, to stomp on the creek. And we've been very, very successful this year. It's now getting too cold to do it, but we're recruiting volunteers for the spring and the summer. So if you think that you would like to go on a hike with us with kids, please see me after the program. We're recruiting for next year. All right, community happenings. The first thing I want to tell you about just dovetails immediately into Jack's program tonight. This is the River Partnership, the 5th annual meeting, and it is 1 week from today. It is Wednesday at the AB Tech Auditorium, Ferguson Auditorium, from 9 to 11:30. And my gosh, it's a who's who. It is Julie Mayfield, state legislature. It is our mayor. It is the mayor, Esther Mannheimer from Asheville, but the mayor from Canton. It is every community, Land of Sky. We're all talking about what to do about the river. And Jack is going to try to show up. And you guys all know that 16 miles of our river has been declared full of bacteria, or not full, but it's contaminated, right? So what are we going to do, and how are we going to protect the river? And Jack's going to talk a length about that. You can sign up with Susan at riverlink.org. And next Tuesday in this room, the Blue Ridge Naturalist Network is going to do coyotes. And don't you all love coyotes? So come show up at 7 o'clock. And golly gee, it is Christmas. Do you believe that? It is Christmas time. So next month, we're not going to have a program. We are going to go back to our original mother church, the Unitarian Universalist congregation over on 1 Edgewood Place, Edwin Place. And please bring a potluck to share and a little sign saying what's in your potluck, because different people are allergic to different things. And please bring your own place settings so that we don't have a whole bunch of dishes to wash right there. So please come. Now notice we couldn't get it for the first Wednesday, so it is the second Wednesday, December 13th, and it's at 5:30. So don't wait until 7, come at 5:30. But our next program, the first Wednesday, January, will be on biodiversity. Do you know that we're one of the most biodiverse places in the entire universe, right? And Will Harlan of the Center for Biodiversity is going to show you pictures of these wonderful creatures and critters, but also talk about endanger and what we can do to protect. Okay, so this is why you came. The wild and scenic. Jack is going to talk about the wild and scenic part is the North Fork of the French Broad. And the threats, do you know that there were actually, am I saying this right, Jack, 14 different attempts to put dams on our beautiful French Broad River? Can you imagine what it'd be like with 14 dams on our river? Jack, as you probably know, is an award-winning, and guess what? Sierra Club gave him our own award 10 years ago, and we were just having a celebration. And he is with Carolina Public Press, which is absolutely wonderful, and has done all kinds of stuff on the forests, on the river, and he's going to tell you all about it. So, Jack.
Hey, thanks everyone. Thank you, Judy, for the introduction. Give me a second while I pull up my presentation. Thank you, Avery. This is Avery, everyone. Thanks, Avery. Yeah, thank you all for coming out on such a cold night, and hello to everyone who's watching on Zoom. It's really great. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about the French Broad and some of the reporting that I've done lately about it. I wanted to start out with a quote from Aldo's son, actually, Luna, who is also distinguished. And I just wanted to present this quote to explain why I think talking about the North Fork and the French Broad is important. I mean, obviously, rivers are an important, a key indicator of the health of our landscapes and our ecosystems. But I also think that rivers, you know, how we steward rivers as a community, as a society, says a lot about who we are. So I'm hoping that my reporting also explains not just the ecology of our river, of our forests, of our mountains, but also about us, the people who are stewarding the rivers themselves. Before I get into talking about the North Fork, I do want to give you a bit of a history lesson, some history that you all may already know that Judy mentioned about some of the attempts to dam the French Broad and its tributaries multiple times over the last few decades. But if you haven't, and I'd be happy to share this presentation. This is a link to my reporting for Carolina Public Press on the North Fork, which came out in September. And by the way, I definitely have to give a shout out to Carolina Public Press for over the years giving me the opportunity to write about, to really do deep dives into the forest plan and this kind of stuff. This is almost a 5,000 word piece that was divided into 2 sections. And when my editor gets these, she usually sighs, you know, that this is going to be a lot of work, but she admits that people actually read them and want to know what's going on. But I'm grateful. There are few publications that really have the bandwidth or the willingness to give that kind of space. So I'm grateful to them. Hopefully they'll let me keep doing it into the future. But just by the way, before I go into my history lesson, I want to point out where the North Fork of the French Broad is. And this is a map. It's in Western Transylvania County, and the North Fork meets the West Fork near the junction of 64 and Highway 215. And that is mile 0 of the French Broad River. That's where the French Broad begins, right by Headwaters Outfitters, if you're down that way by Rosman. And I want to talk about specifically a 3.2 mile section of the river and the effort to seek wild and scenic river designation. And I do actually have a few updates that I'll share with you towards the end of the presentation. And I hope to talk for about 35 minutes. I don't want to bore you to death. So, and then save some time for Q&A. Okay, so here's a little history lesson. Are you all familiar? Raise your hand if you're familiar with the Wild and Scenic Act. And, you know, it obviously came out of the incredible Conservation Congress of the 1960s and was just one of a litany of pieces of federal legislation that protected our environment. And the Wild and Scenic River Act came out in 1968. I think it can be a little bit complicated, but if you know Josh Kelly of Mountain True, Josh is so great at summarizing things. And I think his quote gets right to the point of what the Wild and Scenic River Act was all about. It was, you know, to ensure that our rivers are not just protected, but they're not dammed, you know. And as you all probably know, the 60s was the, you know, the tail end of the big dam era. You know, from the TVA, obviously this region was hugely impacted by the effort of the federal government to dam our rivers for flood control, for power generation. By the 1960s, I think most of the big opportunities to dam rivers had come to an end. But just while the federal government was creating legislation to protect rivers, they were also busy making plans to dam rivers too. So maybe 5 years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, for WNC magazine, I was writing a feature, in the process of writing a feature about the French Broad River and efforts to protect it. And my the then editor of WNC magazine, John Elliston, who, by the way, he enjoys for fun. He goes to the state archives just to sift through stuff. And he mentioned to me, he said, Jack, by the way, you should check out this pile of letters and correspondence and articles about an effort to dam 14 tributaries of the French Broad by the TVA in 1966. And I hadn't, it rang a bell. I said, I kind of remember hearing about this, but I drove over, got a look. Also, by the way, turns out UNCA also has elements of in their archive of this epic battle against the TVA, but it was incredibly fascinating. And I'll tell you, I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but I think it is really, really important to talk about and paint the context for why people are interested in wild and scenic designation for the North Fork. But just to give you a little bit of background, in the early 60s, the TVA had sort of, again, finished the big dam era. And instead of building big dams, they created a sub office called the OTAD, and their job was to dam tributaries. So they went around, they had engineers, they knew how to build dams, and they were, by God, going to still do it. And so one of their projects was to look at the upper French Broad and to dam 14 tributaries, among them, which I circled right there. I know that map is hard to see, but it was 14 dams throughout the upper French Broad, including the North Fork. The first dam was scheduled to be built on the Mills River at the confluence of the North and the South Mills River. And by the way, it also included a dam on the Swannanoa on the Warren Wilson campus, as well as a bunch of levees. It would have transformed the French Broad River through Asheville. It was a massive, massive project. And essentially the justification for the project, one was economic development. They thought it would spur the economy of Western North Carolina. But primarily, I think it was for flood control. And, as you know, the history, the 1916 flood, but many, many other floods throughout, we are prone to flash flooding and big floods because of the mountains, because of the weather systems. I don't need to tell you all that, you know it. And 1964, by the way, there was quite a large and impactful flood that particularly hit Hendersonville badly. And so there was interest in trying to control floods. So as a result, there was widespread support for this dam project. I feel I'm not cussing when I say dam project, but you take that for, you interpret it how you want. But it was just an incredible story. And I just want to give you just a little bit of background on it. And I'll try not to go too far into the weeds. But as I was going through these papers, it became clear there were a few important figures in the effort to fight the TVA, but one of them is Jerry Britton. And I figured, well, let me see if Jerry's still around. And it turns out he is. And in just a few days after looking through that material, I was sitting with Jerry in his home talking about their effort. Is just incredible. And in fact, next week I'll be seeing Jerry for a Warren Wilson thing. But anyway, he gave me a great history and explained so many of the dynamics behind the fight. But it was a grassroots fight that was made up of people from the communities that were going to be impacted by the dam. Jerry's family land, which goes back multiple generations, would have been submerged by the dam. And Mills River, 60 families would have lost their homes. And Jerry created an organization called the Upper French Broad Defense Association. And it's a great story. We'll do another talk on it in the future, maybe. And that's a picture of Jerry back in the day And that's Jerry just a couple of years ago on the river. But what I do want to share with you is the National Environmental Protection Act was passed, and they forced the TVA. That law required the TVA to hold public hearings for the first time ever in TVA history. The second public hearing of the TVA was held on this campus in 1971. The first one was held just a couple weeks before in Tennessee for another project of the TVA on which river I can't recall right now. But it was an incredible event. It was a 3-day event. I have the entire transcript, thanks to Jerry Britton, of everyone who spoke at it, including Ted Snyder of the Sierra Club. The Sierra, according to Jerry, the Sierra Club came a little bit late to the fight. It was mostly a grassroots effort, but they played a key role in it. And this is from Ted's actual, for 3 days, people presented on the UNCA campus to the Tennessee Valley Authority. And they all wore, you can kind of see it in the picture. That was in the Humanities building. I don't know which one that is. Is that Lipinski? I'm not sure. But anyway, they all wore yellow bandanas that say the Upper French Broad Defense Association. And it's amazing. It's like reading a little movie as you go through the transcripts. There were just some great speakers. Most people were against the TVA project. And the next year, following the red wave in 1972, where Republicans won big, including Nixon, the TVA dropped the project. And, you know, David beat Goliath. But it's a really great story, but we came really, really close, really close. In fact, this project was supported far and wide by every politician in the land. The governor eventually at the time gave up his support for it, Bob Scott, but county commissioners, city councils, senators, representatives, they all supported it. There was just one politician, an up and coming politician, was the only one who opposed the project. Does anyone want to take a guess on who that was? No, from Transylvania County. Jesse Hills? Oh, who was it? Yeah. Charles Taylor was the only one who was opposed to the project. I won't go into depth into that, but he did play an important role in the opposition to the dam. He had become a state senator, and 72, I think he went on. Yeah, he was just, yep. Good. You know your history. Yeah, and he served for how many? He was a representative for, I don't know, 16 years, maybe? Long time. But anyway, yeah, I love this. This is one of my favorite headlines. I love good headlines. Down the drain. That was it. Okay, so that was it for dam building on the North Fork in the French Broad tributary. Oh, no, wait a minute. Just 20 years later, the USDA Soil Conservation Service had another plan to build dams on 6 tributaries, again, including the North Fork. And once again, there was significant resistance to building these dams. Some people did support it, particularly people in the community of Rosman that have had to deal with flooding from the North Fork over time. But again, this plan was ultimately thwarted. It was shot down. They did some other flood prevention stuff, but no dam. So twice the North Fork and other tributaries barely escaped being flooded. And so I really wanted to give you that background because I think it's important for the conversation about the North Fork. And again, just to point out the obvious, it's not that dams. I have no idea whether there'll be another dam proposal in Western North Carolina, but it is an arrow in our quiver, I suppose, to be able to deal with the threats from climate change and the potential flooding that might come with it. And so Hurricane Fred, 6 people lost their lives to this storm. And it's really hard to see the rain map on the right, but in the French Broad in the North Fork of the French Broad watershed, 22 inches of rain fell in a 60-hour period. And I'm presuming we can expect the higher probability of more of that. And we really have to be thinking about how we adapt and become more resilient to flooding in the future from these kind of storms. I'm not proposing or suggesting we have dams, but maybe, right? So I think it's important to rehash the history of that. So I want to come back and now talk about wild and scenic designation and the North Fork. And back in April, I think it was, I got a message from Kevin Colburn, and Kevin is the stewardship director for American Whitewater. And he said, asked me if I was coming to the public question and answer session in Transylvania County about efforts to seek wild and scenic designation for the North Fork. And that was sort of the beginning of this effort to seek this federal designation for the North Fork River. And just to give you a little bit more information about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, it is for rivers that have some outstanding, remarkable value. And that means that it falls into one of 3 categories, wild, scenic, or recreational, right? And I'll sort of explain that in the context of the North Fork, because I think that's important. But what the Wild and Scenic River essentially does is it keeps rivers free flowing, right? So it prevents the ability to build a dam on a section of river that has the highest level of river protection in the land, right? Federally. So in North Carolina, there are just 5 sections of river that have a wild and scenic designation. And that map is not super great to see. I probably could have picked a better one, but one of them is the Lumber River out in eastern North Carolina, and then 4 of them are here in western North Carolina, Wilson Creek and the Chattooga, the horse pasture, and a section of the New River. And I included a quote from Kevin Colburn here at the bottom. And his view is that this important piece of legislation has been far underutilized in Western North Carolina. And one of the jobs of American Whitewater is to help communities seek designation, to provide them with education, to provide them with support in building a grassroots effort to make it. So it's big time on Kevin's radar to help protect these rivers and keep them free flowing. So here is how I want to explain the process of how rivers become wild and scenic. And it is a bit complicated. Things look a little bit different out west than they do here in the east or the southeast. But essentially, it begins with a public land manager identifying rivers that are eligible for wild and scenic designation. And that just happened in the Pisgah and Nantahala National Forest back in February. So as you probably know, and have had a speaker in the past, I believe, speak on it, is that the 10-year process of creating a new land management plan for the 1 million acres of national forest came to a conclusion back in February. And part of that process is evaluating, I think the Forest Service evaluated about 50 sections of river and evaluated whether they would be suitable and eligible for this designation. And in the draft plan, which came out in 2022, the North Fork of the French Broad was not included among that list. And the Forest Service at that point had felt like, and if you've ever been down to the North Fork, it is really remote. There's not a designated trail down there, although there's a Fisher Trail. And there's a few ways to get down to the river in this in the gorge, as they call it, the 3.2 mile section. It's very steep and rugged, and the trail is not very accessible. But despite its remoteness, despite its beauty, it's right next to the road. And there are a few pretty impacted campsites down there. And that was the Forest Service justification for not making it eligible. But American Whitewater, Mountain True, other organizations during the process where they can contest portions of the forest plan, they asked the Forest Service to reconsider, and which they did. So in the final forest plan, these are the 19 rivers that are eligible for wild and scenic designation. So that is the first step, that the Public Land Management Agency says this is a river that can potentially seek this designation. So if you see your favorite river up there, go at it, begin to develop your mission to seek wild and scenic river status. The French Broad River, and just to be clear, our section of French Broad probably won't be wild and scenic. This is a small 2-mile section at the Tennessee state line. I think maybe on section 9, although I'm not sure. So we'll see. But anyway, here's the North Fork of the French Broad. It is eligible. And that's why once the forest plan came out in February, people were waiting for this. They were ready to jump on it and say, this is a river super high on a lot of people's lists for making it wild and scenic. For Kevin Colburn, who represents his constituency as the whitewater paddling community, this is a prized whitewater section of river. It's a creek, which means it only runs when it rains. So it only has roughly 50 days out of the year where a paddler can actually go down it. And Kevin always explains to me, he's like, yeah, Jack, it's a beginner creek, which means that it's a super highly advanced river to paddle on. I would never touch it. But paddlers, it is a very important river for paddlers. And it doesn't get a ton of traffic because it is so difficult and it only runs at certain periods of time. But also fishers, anglers love this river. It's an important trout stream, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I just want to point out, I'm not here to advocate for whether it should be wild and scenic or not. I just want to provide you all the information as a reporter so you can decide for yourself. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer. Although it is a great place, I love great places in the outdoors. So just a few things about the North Fork, just to point out, is a few things that make it, I think, appealing for protection is a couple of the things that I already mentioned. But, the quality, Judy mentioned the poor quality of the French Broad River. And of course, a lot of that happens, in Henderson County and Buncombe County. But our tributaries are fundamental for managing the quality of water of the French Broad. So protecting our tributaries is vital for the future of this particular river, or any river for that matter. So the path to wild and scenic status, here I make it look pretty simple. Just 6 steps, check them off along the way, and you'll get there in a minute. But it's really potentially very long and difficult. Like me paddling the North Fork, I may not make it down to the bottom in one piece. But it really, again, it begins with the eligibility typically in a public land management document, such as the forest plan. So we got that, check, scratch that one out. We're good to go there. But the next step really involves a strong, widespread support from the community. So, Kevin will tell you this is, it's not enough that just paddlers want this to be a wild and scenic river. It has to be supported by a broad coalition of a variety of interests. And that can be very, very difficult, particularly in Western North Carolina, and maybe particularly in Transylvania County, where the relationship among people of Western North Carolina and public land is a tricky one, right? And you all probably obviously know this is, I think we all love our forests, no matter who you are, what your economic interest is, your cultural background, but we all kind of love it in a different way. And public land management has a pretty dark, our acquisition of public lands has a very, very dark history, whether we're talking about the Great Smoky Mountain National Park or even the Pisgah National Forest, where land was voluntarily purchased. So, it's understandable that people have mixed feelings about public lands and public land designations. So building that community support is difficult, but this support behind the North Fork, there is pretty widespread support for it. And I wanted to put a couple of pictures of people who are important to this effort. One of them on the left, that is Harrison Metzger. And Harrison was for many years a writer, a reporter for the Hendersonville Times News, the Hendersonville newspaper. And back in the 80s, he covered the damming effort. And he handed me, back in my reporting in May, June, he handed me his entire manila folder filled with all of his reporting, which was really great. And the reporting is outstanding. Harrison was and is still an excellent reporter. And interestingly enough, Harrison moved to Western North Carolina for the paddling and loved the North Fork. But he reported, from my view, he really reported fairly on all sides, in his effort to report it. But Harrison was at that meeting back in April, advocating for the North Fork and obviously representing the paddling community. But also David Whitmire in the top right, and David Whitmire is a lifelong Transylvania County resident. He owns Headwaters Outfitters. He was a paddler and is a paddler still, of course, but he's paddled the North Fork, fell in love with it. He's also a sportsman, but he comes from a very different perspective maybe than other people, perhaps people in this room, of how he views the protection of national forests. But he is a supporter of the wild and scenic status, and he's been a driving force behind this. Once there is grassroots and community support, the next step is support from local governments. And in this case, one reason the North Fork is a nice candidate for wild and scenic status is it's in one county, Transylvania County. That's it. So when a river moves through multiple counties, it becomes a little bit more complicated. Now you need support from multiple county governments, right? In this case, just one county government needs to support it, right? But that might be difficult, as I'll point out. But presuming local governments support it, the next step is that Congress, the local congressman by custom, or the state senator, the US senators for North Carolina would support legislation that would then go to Congress. And I can't really speak to the current senators, but Richard Burr, our past senator, has been very supportive of this kind of designation. So it's not necessarily a Republican Democrat issue. I just want to point that out. I don't know where our senators stand, but as you know, our local congressman is Chuck Edwards, and I've reached out to Edwards for his comment, but he's not prepared to do that at this point. And whether he would support this legislation or not is anyone's guess. Perhaps you would think it would be a good legacy, but I can't speak for Congressman Edwards. I have no idea. But after that, it requires the signature of the president. The last wild and scenic designation in North Carolina was Wilson Creek, and that was legislation from Cass Ballinger, who was a Republican from Hickory. So there you have it, right? But we'll see. That's the process for wild and scenic designation. And I just want to give you a couple of updates of where it is, and I'll try and wrap things up because I know I'm getting to that point. But actually, it started out back in April. There was a public meeting in Balsam Grove, which is upriver of the proposed designation. But many people in this little community of Balsam Grove had concerns. And it was an effort to present the legislation, what it does, what it doesn't do. There's lots of misconceptions about a complicated piece of legislation, as you can imagine. And then back in May was the public open house in Transylvania County. This was held by the Transylvania Natural Resource Commission, a 15-member commission that represents various interests and municipalities in Transylvania County. So David Whitmire represents Rosman in this county commission that makes recommendations, this council that makes recommendations to the Transylvania County commissioners. And in September, that body unanimously approved a recommendation to seek wild and scenic status for the North Fork of the French Broad. And in October, on October 9th, Owen Carson, who is the chair of that council, presented to the 5 elected county commissioners. And it's probably worth it, if you want to get into the weeds. I've given the link to that meeting. Owen does a phenomenal job of presenting, the scope of this recommendation. And he's hit with a bunch of really good questions from the 5 commissioners. And it's important to see what those questions are. Like, how do we benefit? What's the benefit to us? Why should we approve something that not everyone can access and use? Lots of really, really good questions. It was an informational item. So it was not an action item. There was no vote on it. It was just to find out more information. After watching that video, my guess would be that 2 members might be in favor of it. 2 members would not be in favor of it, and 1 member might be in favor of it. That's just my interpretation. You can take a look at it, but it's certainly not unanimous. So where it goes from here, who knows? It could take years. It could be that the county commission takes a vote on it and says no, and guess what? That's the end of it until a new group comes along. Or maybe they pass a resolution 3-2 saying that we think this is a good idea. Would Edwards see that as, approval from the county, or would he not? So county commissions have a lot of power in the future of wild and scenic, as well as the future of potential wilderness areas. So that's kind of where we are right now. Oh, yeah. And just getting back to this thing about Republicans and Democrats and politics, this is obviously a political process. But data, lots of data shows this, is that, wilderness is very divisive when you mention wilderness designation, that, that's a tough sell in Western North Carolina. We might see some around Craggy and Buncombe County, but in more rural county, the other rural counties of Western North Carolina with forest land, they're not into it for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into. But rivers tend to be, everyone loves rivers. Like, I don't know what it is about rivers. Maybe wilderness designation restricts uses that bother people and access, but everyone, protecting rivers, clean water is something that everyone can rally behind. And so wild and scenic river designation tends to cross those political boundaries, which I think is kind of cool to think about. And that human piece, that what does it say about us as a society? But I do have a cautionary tale, which I don't know if this will apply to the North Fork, but back in late 2021, I think this reporting came out in 2022, another 5,000 worder. So if you're going to read it, make yourself comfortable for a bit. But this was an effort, a multi-year effort, a many-year effort to seek wild and scenic river designation for the Nolichucky River. And the Nolichucky goes through the Pisgah National Forest in Yancey and Mitchell County, and then crosses the state line into Irwin County. So wild and scenic river designation is more complicated because it's in 3 different counties. And most of the North Carolina portion is in a very narrow, remote gorge where there is a large whitewater industry, but that whitewater industry tends to be centered at the outlet of the canyon or of the gorge in Irwin, in Tennessee. Or wait, is it Union County? Oh, Unicoi County. Anyway, check my counties on that. Unicoi County in Irwin is the town. But there was widespread support from many of the rafting companies, many of the businesses, many of the local people really supported this. And they felt like the organizers of this grassroots effort that had been brewing for years felt like now's the time, like, let's move this forward. The Nolichucky was recognized in the forest plan, in the previous forest plan, so it was eligible. It is still eligible. And they also felt like, my understanding from my reporting is that our 2 senators at the time were prepared to co-author legislation for wild and scenic status. But the first step was support from those counties. And initially, Yancey and Mitchell County commissions supported it. But some misinformation sort of generated from a farming organization in Irwin in East Tennessee that felt like, this is going to infringe on your property rights and will impact what you can do with your land. My reporting showed that none of that was correct, but it was enough to sort of disrupt that plot process where Irwin was unwilling to support it, or Unicoi County was unwilling to support it, and Mitchell and Yancey County withdrew their resolutions supporting it. And so that was the end. That was I wouldn't say the end forever, but that effort sort of came to a close. That was it. So despite being able to get an enormous amount of support from it, it's very political when it gets to that county level. So I just present that as a bit of a cautionary a bit of a cautionary tale of what might happen. I think just last thing I'll share with you are my key takeaways, I think, from this reporting that I think are important. All of this, I think I've already said, but it's obviously, this is a very political process. And as you all know, this, as we think about climate change, as we think about protecting our environment, it gets complicated and it gets political. And so that's one of my key takeaways in this reporting. I feel like my mission also with the reporting is to just lay out the facts, as clearly as I can of what wild and scenic river status or what wilderness designation does or what the forest plan does or doesn't do. These are really complicated things to get your head around. And so I like the challenge of being able to simplify them, but also to help people understand how are we impacted by these various laws or these various ways that land managers are stewarding our forests and rivers and so on. I think the other thing that I've learned is that, and I think this is probably a lesson the Sierra Club already knows pretty well, but what made the 1966 to 1972 effort to stop the TVA's dam wasn't Jerry Britton. Jerry often, and he always says, my role in this has been overstated, but I beg to differ. He was incredible in his fight. But what is amazing, it was an incredibly broad group of diverse stakeholders that came together in a unified effort to push back on what they saw as a wrong-headed plan to completely alter the upper French Broad River. It included environmental groups, the Sierra Club. It included Republicans. It included Democrats. It included Charles Taylor. It included all sorts of people. And so I think one of the lessons is that, seeking various protections, seeking the kind of policies or legislation that will make our landscape, our rivers healthier requires a broad coalition. And that's one of my key takeaways in all of this reporting. So, hey, thanks for letting me babble on and talk about this, but I'd like to open the floor if y'all have any questions.
Thank you, Jack. That was very, very helpful. So first thing, I want to make a correction. The Coyote program is not next Tuesday. It is Tuesday a week on the 14th. And it's the Blue Ridge Naturalist Network. So you can go to their website if you want more information. We want to take questions from the floor. We've got two wonderful people with microphones. Please please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and we have questions on chat as well.
I have a question. Does being a wild and scenic river have any influence on what local businesses and endeavors can discharge into the river? Because I'm thinking about Nuclear Fuel Services in Erwin, Tennessee, which is building submarine reactor fuel out of highly enriched uranium. And there's a lot of issues connected to their discharge into that river.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act does not. However, there's plenty of other legislation. So I think the Wild and Scenic River Act was created not to supersede or change or make more complex. So, as in this case of the North Fork, the French Broad, the National Forest has a mandate to manage that river to certain standards and certain laws, but the Wild and Scenic River Act doesn't change that.
So that's no explanation for why it fell apart.
Yeah. Yep.
First a comment and then a question. The comment is, I suspect that we are more partisan now than in the past, and that getting sides, both Democrats and Republicans, to agree on wild and scenic river status is probably tougher, more partisan now than it used to be.
Yeah.
That's a comment.
Yeah.
The questions are, I'm curious about these 14 dams on the tributaries. And I think you said that part of the pressure was flood control, which I guess makes some sense, although I'm not sure how well they work for that,
Yeah.
but the other one, you said something about development, and by development, did you mean cabins around little lakes, or did you mean, or I don't know what you meant about development, but and the other question is, so none of it was hydropower.
Yeah, no, that's correct. None of it was hydropower. And I actually have the report, the entire report that was created by the TVA, their cost benefit analysis, their justification. Jerry Britton's and many others, their concern was that it woefully understated the future costs. But yeah, when you read through it, some of it is, the tourism economy. These lakes will attract people to them. So that was one. But the other thing is they felt like it would attract industry to the region, that they would benefit from, the access to these lakes. It wasn't very clear. It was a report that didn't fly in 1966, and it would never hear, but I think the main, I think people saw it as an economic boom, including the construction and the jobs that it would potentially bring. But they definitely saw it, policymakers saw it as a windfall for the region. And I agree with you, we probably are. These issues of public land designation do seem to be increasingly partisan, and that's a little distressing.
Jack, I have a question that I'm trying to make sense out of in my own mind. Let's see if I can give it some sense. I think we've been talking about how political party polarization does not seem to be a big issue in this, if you look at it that way. At least I've understood that to be part of what you're saying. But how about the urban rural cultural divide? I assume that all kinds of people get involved in these things, and some have urban backgrounds and others have deeply rural backgrounds. Does that appear to be an area of predictable conflict in these things?
Yeah, I would say yes, for sure. And when you look at the reporting on the creation of the forest plan, many, I think 13 county commissions passed resolutions opposing wilderness. They were non-binding resolutions, but they were making a point that, this kind of designation, we don't have an interest in it. And so I think there is a, rural urban divide. And I think that has to do, maybe there's a historical context, but, I think also, I think partly there's a perception that designations like wilderness, even potentially wild and scenic, will change the way that people have used the land in the past. In other words, wilderness, for instance, some folks see it because of the restrictions that come with wilderness as closing off access to land that people have used either for economic reasons or for cultural reasons. And I think that's, I think that's something that comes with living in the rural counties that have a different relationship to the public lands than perhaps maybe your average Ashevillean, So yeah, I think it's complicated. And I think there's decades of history to unravel. And then, of course, in the current political climate, that also seems to complicate it too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Great question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. Really interesting stuff. With the beginning of the big dam era being in the 1930s, we're coming up on almost the 2030s. We're talking about technology that I guess hasn't changed that much because we're still talking about the same general concept. Are there developments in environmental engineering, civil engineering that would either make dams obsolete or provide alternatives to achieve the same ends as dams?
Yeah. I'm not no expert at all on the potential technologies, but at one point I'm trying to remember when I reported on this, but Jim Fox, who was the director of NEMAC for a long time at UNCA, the data group here, if you know what I'm talking about, that does the environmental data. We had a long conversation about dams and, you know, like, are they something that, is it legitimately something that we should consider in the future? But there is new technologies, you know, not dams per se, but temporary structures that can capture water in the event of, you know, a big dump like we've had in 2004, or this last one, I think it was 2004, where we had big floods, but the other floods that impact it. But it's tricky, you know, it's like, somehow people would be impacted by this kind of infrastructure, and it's complicated of where we put those kind of things. Maybe it's not as invasive as a dam, but maybe it does require, you know, moving people from their homes or putting in a piece of infrastructure that people don't want. And as you know, in Buncombe County, that's a big issue. Typically we've put those things in, you know, historically in poor neighborhoods. You know, we probably shouldn't do that again, but try putting a piece of infrastructure in a rich neighborhood. That's also probably not going to fly either. So it does make it complicated. But yeah, I would presume there's some kind of technology out there. And I think, you know, also the other thing that I'm hopeful of is I think the forest plan, I think we're stewarding our forests in a smarter, better way. I'm not saying the forest plan is perfect. I'm not, but I think our forests will be stewarded better, and that's fundamental for being able to deal with floods, making sure that we have a very healthy landscape. So maybe that's the smartest way to approach it. But if we get 20 inches of rain, you know, on the Great Balsam Mountains, that water's coming, and, you know, that'll be interesting to think about. It's a great question. And I'd like to explore that one more in particular in my reporting in the future.
In regards to the North Fork, looking at it as, in speaking to the North Fork in Transylvania County, I mean, Transylvania County has had some significant successes in creating state parks and all that. So the politics there has been very interesting over the years. With the two wilderness areas there off the Parkway, Middle Prong and Shining Rock, that I believe, and I'm not sure my geography, I'm pretty sure there's both, Haywood County. So there again, we talk about politics. I would say in other projects I've been involved with in Western North Carolina over the years, in the various steps we talk about and getting all of the support, I would say political is the first step.
Yeah.
Be it the Blue
Yeah.
Ridge Parkway headquarters, be it I-26, be in a lot of these projects. If you can convince the politicians first, and then you get a leadership group, that's what really moves the needle.
Yeah.
From my little experience I've had.
Yeah. Yeah. I think these, you know, and Kevin Colburn is often my source for thinking about these things, and he works nationwide and working with communities, but you know, his approach is really interesting. He is very careful about, you know, forcing things on people, you know, and letting communities make that decision. But I think you're right. You know, how do you get, but you know, what comes first? Because the politicians might say, well, you know, do the people support it? That's what really matters to me. Yeah, yeah. I think it's a good insight.
Well, we want to thank you, Jack. That was very helpful and very enlightening. So yes. And I want to invite you all to come to the party, the potluck, the second Wednesday, December 13th at the Unitarian Universalist Church. And I want you back here to be invited January 3rd on Western North Carolina biodiversity. So thank you all for coming. Very much appreciative.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.